So fellas, 2 weeks of fight nights in a row with no Apex card might be some sort of miracle for the UFC, but we've got UFC Des Moines this week, Sandhagen versus Figueiredo. It's a nice little card in a crowded arena for a fight night. We've got the return of Jeremy Stephens, we've got Reiner doing a Nickal, and obviously big implications in the main event for the Bantamweight division, so we're going to be breaking down every fighter on UFC Des Moines, as well as my own personal predictions, and we'll go in there with the first fight as always, with 3-3 Julianna Miller kicking off the card, which is never a good sign as she takes on Ivana Petrovic. Now, Julianna Miller comes from a heavy grappling background. She competed in combat jiu-jitsu, comes from a heavy jiu-jitsu background. Started off from MMA career 2-1 with her first 3 fights, then come through on the Ultimate Fighter, wins on the Ultimate Fighter, both her fights in the Ultimate Fighter, gets contract for the UFC, and so far, starts off a UFC career by winning the Ultimate Fighter by getting a finish, but now she's lost her last 2 fights in a row to Veronica Hardy and Luana Santos, got finished in the last fight. Going to be taking on Petrovic, who started off her MMA career undefeated on a big roll, becoming a champion on the local scene, and then so far in the UFC, she's 1-2, losing to Jamie Lynn Hoff in her most recent fight. I'm going to be going with Petrovic to win this one by decision. Yeah, Julianna Miller came into the UFC as a bit of a BJJ prospect, but she hasn't really lived up to the hype. I know that loss to Veronica Hardy isn't that bad, but she hasn't really impressed me with the wrestling so far. Even on the regional scene, she didn't really look that good. I think Petrovic's going to keep this fight standing, and I think she's just going to outstrike Julianna Miller across 3 rounds. So I think Petrovic keeps the fight standing, outstrikes Julianna Miller, who's got absolutely awful striking, and I just see Ivana Petrovic getting this one done by decision. Bit of, again, it's low-level women MMA, hard to predict just like fat heavyweights, but I'm going to go with Ivana Petrovic to win this one by decision. And talking of fat heavyweights, we've got Don'Tale Mayes versus Thomas Peterson. Not the best way to start off the card, is it? You've got Don'Tale Mayes, who went 3-1 in his first 3 fights in MMA, ended up becoming a champion on the local scene, comes through on the Contender Series, and actually loses on the Contender Series. So we goes back to the regional scene, beats Mohammed Usman on the regional scene, gets another chance at the Contender Series, gets a finish, then the UFC send him back to the regional scene where he gets another finish, and then again, he goes on his 3rd time on the Contender Series to finish his opponent, loses his first 2 fights in the UFC to Cyril Gane and Rodrigo Nascimento, and since then, it's kind of been a bit of a win-loss fighter in the heavyweight division, with his most recent fight, him getting submitted by Valter Walker in the first round. Going to be taking on Thomas Peterson, who actually had quite a big role for a heavyweight before the UFC. His only loss was to Waldo Cortez Gaston, who was a champion on the regional scene, came through on the Contender Series getting a key lock submission, and so far in the UFC, he's 1-2, with his most recent fight being him getting knocked out by none other than Mr. Shamil Gaziev himself. Listen, it's a low-level heavyweight fight. It's hard to predict. It could genuinely go either way. Don'Tale Mayes being ranked last year or early this year just shows the state of this division. The fact that he was actually ranked before losing to Valter Walker. I'm going to go Thomas Peterson to win this one by decision. I just think he's a better fighter than Don'Tale Mayes. I think he's a better striker, keeps this fight standing. Their boxing's pretty even. I'd actually say Don'Tale Mayes is the better striker, but I can see Thomas Peterson moving in with takedowns because Don'Tale Mayes has awful grappling. His grappling is genuinely awful. He never, improves his grappling. He got taken down and dominated by Shamil Gaziev, taken down and submitted by Valter Walker, taken down by Nascimento, submitted by Cyril Gane as well. I know Gane's, one of the best heavyweights, but he's not really known for his grappling as well. So Don'Tale Mayes has awful grappling. I see Thomas Peterson mixing it up with the grappling and keeping his boxing at range, and I think he outboxes Don'Tale Mayes and probably cuts Don'Tale Mayes from the UFC. If you're going to cut Rosenstrike for losing to Serhiy Pavlovich, you can't keep Don'Tale Mayes to losing to fucking Thomas Peterson. So I'm going to go Peterson to win this one. Low-level heavyweight fight. I think he just keeps the fight standing and occasionally mixed up with the grappling, which is where he's going to score points, and I think he gets the decision win across 3 rounds. Then we've got Gaston Bolanos versus Quang Lee. Gaston Bolanos has a kickboxing heavy background. He comes from a kickboxing career and a Muay Thai career to start off his combat sports career. Went straight into Bellator, had a nice little run in Bellator, and then joins the UFC. And so far in the UFC, he's 2-1, with his only loss being to Marcus McGee, where he got absolutely destroyed in that fight. Going to be taking on Quang Lee, who had an undefeated start to his MMA career. But so far, since joining the UFC, he's lost his last 2 fights in the organization to Gutierrez and recently to Long Zhao as well. I'm going to go Gaston Bolanos to win this one, and I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision. Yeah, Gaston Bolanos is quite a good talent in this division. He just recently absolutely destroyed Cortavius Romius, and I know Cortavius Romius is no longer in the UFC. He's a very low-level fighter, but he does have pretty solid striking as well. Like I said, comes from a kickboxing background. He has good striking, and even in that fight with Cortavius Romius, he did impress me in that fight. He looked pretty solid in that fight, even with the grappling. At times, he was out grappling Cortavius Romius with the ground and pound. His gas tank has shown to hold up so far, and Quang Lee debuting against Chris Gutierrez is never an easy thing to do, and that went to a decision as well, which he didn't even look that bad in. But then losing to Long Zhao by finish, a guy who's not really known for his stand-up ability, isn't a good look for Quang Lee. I'm not exactly sure he's UFC worthy, whereas with Gaston Bolanos, I'm sure he is. So I think it's going to be quite a not a competitive fight, but I think Quang Lee's going to be in the fight at all times for the first 2 rounds, where Gaston Bolanos is kind of just picking him apart. And then in the 3rd round, I can see Gaston Bolanos landing a big shot and putting away Quang Lee. If you're getting finished by Long Zhao, a low-level fighter, I can't see Gaston Bolanos not being able to do it, a guy who's known for his striking, and I don't really see Quang Lee presenting too much of a grappling threat, which is going to be the biggest gateway to beating Gaston Bolanos. And he's only losses to Marcus McGee. The dude's now on a complete roll in the top 15 of the Bantamweight division, so I'm going to go Gaston Bolanos to pick apart Quang Lee and eventually get the finish in the third round. Then we have former failed prospect Marina Rodriguez taking new prospect Gillian Robertson in the strawweight division. You've got Marina Rodriguez, who started off a MMA career undefeated on a huge roll, comes through and gets a good finish on the contender series, and then in the next 4 fights stays undefeated, loses eventually to Carla Esparza, then goes on another 4-fight winning streak, and then gets a main event against Amanda Lemos, gets stopped by Amanda Lemos, bit of a controversial stoppage, but she still got stopped, and now she's in a bit of a tricky position as he's 1-3 in the last 4 fights. Going to be taking on Gillian Robertson, who had a bit of a dodgy start to her MMA career, comes through on the Ultimate Fighter, goes 1-1 on the Ultimate Fighter, and then for a long time she was kind of just a win-loss fighter in the UFC. Good grappler, but wasn't really going far. But now she's had a really good kind of run in the UFC where she's managed to win 5 of her last 6 fights, with her only loss being to Tabitha Ricci, and she actually holds the record for the most submissions in women MMA UFC history right now, which is a very impressive stat to hold. You can kind of tell the game plan of Gillian Robertson. I'm going to be picking her to win as well by submission in the second round. Yeah, Gillian Robertson's massively impressed me in the last couple of fights. She's a really good grappling prospect from Canada, which is surprising because we've got a Canada pay-per-view next week and she's not on the card despite being one of the best prospects. But yeah, she's got really good grappling, absolutely dominated Michelle Waterson-Gomez at UFC 301, I think it was, not 301, at 303 last year, and just dominated Pinheiro as well. If she's not submitting you, she's going to dominate you with grappling for the entire fight. And we've just seen Marina Rodriguez struggle with grappling on a consistent basis. That fight with Yasmin Lucindo, she got taken down and controlled. She's been beaten by what's her name, Verda Jandaroba as well, another heavy grappling base. And even on the feet, she just seems to be a bit of a point fighter these days, does Marina Rodriguez. Even in the fight with Jessica Andrade, who's predominantly a striker, she was getting out grappled too. So Marina Rodriguez hasn't really shown the best grappling. You're now putting her against a good grappling prospect in this division. I'm picking Gillian Robertson to win this one. I think she submits Marina Rodriguez in the second round and pulls through, and hopefully from there we can see Gillian Robertson against somebody in the top 5. Then we've got Azamat Bekoev versus Ryan Loder, 2 guys new to the UFC, with both of them actually have quite interesting kind of stories of how they joined the UFC. So you've got Azamat Bekoev, who had a massive career before the UFC, went over to LFA eventually, went 4-0 in LFA, becoming the defending champion on a multiple time basis, and then gets a 1-week notice fight against Zachary Reese at UFC 311, just on a week's notice, and absolutely pummels him to the ground. He takes him down and then just starts bullying him with ground and pound to the point where he actually managed to knock Zachary Reese out with the ground and pound. Great UFC debut. Going to be taking on Ryan Loder, who also had a pretty solid start to his MMA career. Comes from the Ultimate Fighter, goes 2-0 on the Ultimate Fighter until he gets his main event on the Ultimate Fighter, where he wins the entire tournament. And now he's coming off a win on the Ultimate Fighter after his UFC debut against Robert Valentin. I'm going to go Azamat Bekoev to win this one by TKO in the first round. It is a close fight to call because we've seen Bekoev lose a few times on the regional scene, but I'm not going to look into that too much. Yeah, I just think Bekoev's a better fighter. I think he's the better wrestler than Ryan Loder. I think he's definitely the better striker than Ryan Loder. I think he's comfortable everywhere the fight goes, does Azamat Bekoev. There is a big, heavy jiu-jitsu threat from Ryan Loder, but coming from the Ultimate Fighter, beating Robert Valentin isn't telling us much. I mean, Valentin just got dominated by... What's his name? Torres Finney, that's the guy who just not dominated, but beat Robin Valentin as well. So I'm going to pick Bekoev to TKO him in the first round. I think he's the much better striker. Just brutalized Zachary Reese as he took him down, and he was winning that fight on the feet as well. So I think Bekoev keeps the fight standing, eventually lands the shot on Ryan Loder, who hasn't shown to be the best striker so far on the Ultimate Fighter, has struggled quite a bit on the feet, and he's been beating these low-level guys anyway. So I'm going to go Bekoev by TKO in the first round. Only real key to victory for Ryan Loder I see is him managing to maintain top position on Azamat Bekoev across 3 rounds and riding out a decision, but I think that's unlikely. I'm going to go Bekoev by TKO in the very first round. Then we've got the return of Meisha Tate. There's a lot of returns on this card against Yana Santos. Yana Santos had a nice run before the UFC, getting a lot of wins to start off her MMA career. Actually married to Thiago Santos as well. Kicked off her UFC career by getting a title shot by none other than Chris Cyborg. She got destroyed in that fight, beaten by Chris Cyborg. Then after that went 4-1 in the next couple of fights, but now she's in a position where she's 1-3 in the last 4 fights, coming off a decision win to Chelsea Chandler, which isn't the best win after we just saw how Chelsea Chandler performed last week in August of last year. Going to be taking on Meisha Tate, kind of seen as one of the OGs of women MMA. Had a big start to her MMA career, goes over to Strikeforce, goes a bit of a run, becoming a Strikeforce champion, runs into Ronda Rousey, gets her arm broken by Ronda Rousey, comes over to the UFC again, facing Ronda Rousey for the UFC belt, gets submitted again by Ronda Rousey, then goes on a bit of a win streak, becoming a champion by beating Holly Holm, and now she's in a position where she has lost the vast majority of her recent fights, but she's coming off a win over Julia Avila in December of 2023, where she submitted her to. So Meisha Tate's returning for a second time. I think she's like 40 years old now, is Meisha Tate. I was surprised when I saw her coming back. I know she was in the rankings, but I didn't expect it to actually return. I thought she was going to dip without a retirement fight. Maybe this is that fight where she retires, but I'm actually going to go with the underdog here, Yana Santos. I think she's the underdog anyway. I'm going to go with Yana Santos to win this one. I guarantee 90% of the people picking Meisha Tate to win this one is just because she's got the name value and she's coming off a win. She beat Julia Avila, a very low-level fighter, and I know that Yana Santos also beat a fairly low-level fighter, but I think Yana Santos has just looked better than Meisha Tate recently. I mean, Meisha Tate's been losing the vast majority of her recent fights. She's coming off a 2-year layoff against Julia Avila, and even that was after she took some time off as well. So I just think Yana Santos is the more fresh fighter. She won recently, and she's been facing much higher level fighters than Meisha Tate anyway. So I'm going to go with Yana Santos to win this one by decision. I think she keeps the fight standing and just picks apart Meisha Tate. I don't really know what to expect from Meisha Tate, to be honest. I know she's got the grappling threat, but we're talking about a 40-year-old Meisha Tate who's been out for 2 years, and apart from the name value, there's not really anything really, striking me out to pick her to win this fight. So I'm going to go with Yana Santos to win this one. I'm going to say she gets it done by decision. And then we've got Jeremy Stephens returning to the UFC, as well as Mason Jones, who's also returning to the UFC. Now, Jeremy Stephens is a bit of a veteran for the UFC. Starts off his MMA career on a huge winning streak, and has had a shit ton of fights in the UFC. He's fought the who's who's. He's been around the UFC since 2007, had a massive run in the UFC, and obviously iconically had that press conference moment with Conor McGregor, where McGregor kind of, I mean, to be fair, it worked for Jeremy Stephens. The reason like half the people know who this guy is because of McGregor. So he had that press conference moment with McGregor, and then after that went 3-2, went on a bit of a winning streak, but then had an awful end to his UFC career as he went on one of the biggest losing streaks in UFC history, where he eventually got cut from the UFC. Goes over to PFL, goes 1-2 in PFL, doesn't have the best run in PFL, and then has a couple of boxing fights, boxers Jose Aldo, boxers Chris Avila, goes over to BKFC. He's now on a 3-fight winning streak actually in BKFC, with his most recent fight being him beating Eddie Alvarez early this year as he gets a stoppage win. He's going to be taking on Mason Jones, who was an undefeated prospect from Cage Warriors, managed to become a double champion in Cage Warriors, then comes over to the UFC, goes 1-2 in the UFC, actually managed to beat David Onama, then decides to leave the UFC, doesn't re-sign. I don't think he got cut though, and now he's on a 4-fight winning streak in Cage Warriors with 3 finishes as he makes his UFC return with Jeremy Stephens. I think this is Jeremy Stephens' hometown as well, so I can see why they've brought him back, and it is only a 1-fight win streak, so I think this will be the last time we see Jeremy Stephens in the UFC, kind of like a send-off for his MMA career, which is obviously makes sense to be in the bigger organization in his hometown. But I'm going to go in with Mason Jones to win this one by TKO in the first round. Mason Jones has just been on a roll in MMA. I mean, he's got the win over David Onama in the UFC, which is actually quite impressive. And losing to Mike Davis and Ludovic Klein isn't that bad. And he's now on a 4-fight win streak in Cage Warriors. He looks too good for Cage Warriors. So I think he's a good prospect, is Mason Jones. And Jeremy Stephens, he's getting up there in age. He was probably roided to the gills in BKFC as well. So we're going to be seeing him off the steroids. And even though he's on a 3-fight win streak in BKFC, I mean, we're talking about the wins over Eddie Alvarez and some other lower level guys in BKFC. So I expect Jeremy Stephens to come in quite short with the boxing, but we're talking about a past his prime Jeremy Stephens on a 1-fight winning streak. He's basically been brought over to the UFC to build the name of Mason Jones as he has his final fight in the organization. So I think Mason Jones gets this one done. I still think he's a bit of a prospect in the featherweight division. I think this fight's at 155, but I assume he's going to go back to 145 after this. But yeah, Mason Jones is a bit of a prospect. Better striker than Jeremy Stephens, better all-round martial artist. I think he gets the TKO in the first round. Jeremy Stephens shouldn't really be in the UFC. I mean, even when he went over to PFL, he had a record of 1-2, didn't really look amazing in PFL either. So I'm picking Mason Jones to get this one done. TKO in the first round. Jeremy Stephens is not UFC worthy, but I'm glad that they've brought him back. Home crowd fight. I mean, I'm glad they've brought both of them back, but I think Mason Jones is going to go on a bit of a run in the UFC, whereas this is kind of just like a retirement send-off for Jeremy Stephens. So I'm going to go Mason Jones by TKO in the first round. Then we've got Cameron Smotherman. What a last name as well for a fighter, Smotherman. perfect last name for a heavy grappler, as he takes on Serhiy Sidey. Cameron Smotherman went on a decent run before the UFC, becoming a champion on the local scene, gets a shot on Dana White's contender series and actually gets finished brutally on the contender series. He has to go back on another 3-fight win streak on the regional scene. And then in his last fight, he fought on short notice against Jake Hadley in the bantamweight division and beat Jake Hadley pretty comfortably as well. Got fouled like 3 times in that fight and still won comfortably. Takes on Serhiy Sidey, who went on a big run before the UFC as well, becoming a champion, a double champion on the local scene. Comes through on the contender series as he beats Raymond Tavares, then debuts in the UFC against Raymond Tavares as well, where he loses that fight. But he's coming off a win over Garrett Armfield by split decision in his most recent fight back in November. It's a close fight, to be fair, because Serhiy Sidey's a tough guy. He's a tough guy. Could have won that decision win over Raymond Tavares, a guy who's beaten on the contender series. And he's got wrestling too. I think he's a more well-rounded fighter than Cameron Smotherman. And you've seen Cameron Smotherman. I don't really want to call him a prospect. I mean, he got knocked out on the contender series, or whatever, Jake Hadley, who's not even in the UFC anymore. And he's won a few times, lost a few times in the regional scene. But I must admit that Cameron Smotherman did seem a lot better on the contender series against Jake Hadley. He is riding a bit of a win streak now as well. So I am going to lean towards Cameron Smotherman getting this one done by decision. It is a tough one to call, but I just think he impressed me against Jake Hadley, won that fight unanimously. And that was when Jake Hadley was coming off an impressive one as well over Cowell and Loughran. So I think Cameron Smotherman keeps the fight standing. And on top of that, with Serhiy Sidey, he's a tough fighter and he's got wrestling. He's more well-rounded. But how reliable is he actually using the wrestling? How much do we trust Serhiy Sidey to actually take him down and use the wrestling? He had that fight with Raymond Tavares where he had every opportunity to mix it up with the takedowns and he just didn't. He went to war. He's a fun fighter, but in terms of winning fights, I don't know if I favour him to beat Cameron Smotherman. So I'm going to go Smotherman to win this one by decision. I think he keeps the fight standing. He impressed me against Jake Hadley, and I think he will beat Serhiy Sidey, especially with a full training camp as well that he's had to prepare for Serhiy Sidey. So I'm going to go Cameron Smotherman to win this one by decision. Then we've got 2 up-and-coming bantamweights. This should be an absolute banger. We've got Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos, 17-0. Now, don't let the 17-0 fool you, and I'll tell you why in a second. But Montel Jackson starts off his MMA career on a huge winning streak, comes over to the contender series, gets a great win on the contender series, loses his UFC debut to Ricky Simon. Then after that goes 3-1, and after losing that one fight, he's been on a tear in his last 5 fights. He's on a 5-fight win streak with 3 stoppages, including an 18-second knockout win over Damon Blackshear, which obviously, with the run that Blackshear's on right now, was actually kind of impressive. Going to be taking on Daniel Marcos, who had a big winning streak before his UFC career, becoming a champion on the local scene. Wins on the contender series, gets a knockout in his UFC debut, and then has a very, very controversial fight where he beats Davy Grant, but he should not have won that fight against Davy Grant. Davy Grant should have won that fight, which is why I don't think Daniel Marcos should be highlighted as undefeated. And then since that fight, he's had a no contest with Archie Lung, but he's on a 2-fight winning streak over Adrian Yanez and John Castaneda. Now, I will say this about Daniel Marcos. Even though I think the record's a bit fraudy, he's not, one of these 17-0 upcoming next big things for the bantamweight division. He has definitely improved since that Davy Grant fight. Beating Adrian Yanez, outstruck Adrian Yanez across 3 rounds, and John Castaneda. Those are some pretty good strikers. So he's a solid striker in the bantamweight division with Daniel Marcos, and I do think he deserves to be getting a shot at the top 15. But he's going to be taking on Montel Jackson. And Montel Jackson is one of the most under-the-radar dudes in this division. I'm going to pick Montel Jackson to win this one by decision. He's got pop in his hands, hard hitter for the bantamweight division, which I think is going to pose problems for Daniel Marcos. And this isn't just Adrian Yanez. Daniel Marcos went to a split decision with Adrian Yanez. Yanez is all output, no defense. He's a very, very hittable fighter, but he has got very good offense. Whereas Montel Jackson is a very calm, calculated dude on the feet. Very calculated with his striking. And if you are going to beat Montel Jackson, the game plan is usually to take the fight to the mat, which I just don't see Daniel Marcos, a heavy striker, doing. So I'm going to go with Montel Jackson to win this one by decision. That win over Damon Blackshear is only aging more well as time goes on, because Damon Blackshear is now like a 3 or 4 fight win streak since that loss. So I think Daniel Marcos gets this one done. Not Daniel Marcos. Montel Jackson gets this one done by decision. It is a close fight. Could go either way, but I'm going to lean towards Montel Jackson. I think he's got more potential in the bantamweight division. And even though Daniel Marcos has improved since that Davy Grant fight, I don't know if I'm picking him to win over Montel Jackson. So I'm picking Montel Jackson by decision. Then we've got Santiago Ponzinibbio versus D-Rog. The battle of 2 kind of low-level, top 20, top 25 welterweights who aren't good enough to make it into the top 15, but are good enough to keep their contract in the UFC. Santiago Ponzinibbio went on a massive winning streak before the UFC, a massive unbeaten run with only 1 loss. Comes through on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, goes on a 4-fight winning streak on the Ultimate Fighter. I think he won the tournament as well. Loses UFC debut, but after that debut loss, it went on a bit of a tear in the UFC with a lot of stoppages, including wins over Mike Perry, Sean Strickland, and knockout wins over Gunnar Nelson and Neil Magny as well. well. So he was on a big run in the welterweight division. But now he's in a bit of the opposite stage where he's been losing the vast majority of his recent fights, where he's coming off a win over Carlston Harris, and he has been going to a shit ton of split decisions as well, which is why I kind of feel bad for him. Split decision over Muslim Salikov, Michelle Pereira, and Jeff Neal, which, to be fair, those are fairly high-level dudes in the welterweight division. But he's going to be taking on D-Rod, who also went on a bit of a run before the UFC, comes through on the Contender Series, then goes back to the regional scene, wins and becomes a champion, goes back to the UFC, and again, similar to Ponzinibbio, goes on a bit of a run. He's only lost his Nicholas Derby, beats a couple of guys, faces Li Jingliang on a day's notice, beats Li Jingliang, but it was a very controversial decision. And since that kind of controversial win of Li Jingliang, it's not been the best for D-Rod. He ends up getting submitted by Neil Magny, knocked out by Ian Gary. He was also supposed to fight Santiago Ponzinibbio, which ended up falling through due to him testing positive for Osterine. And then he loses his next fight to Kelvin Gaston, but he's coming off a win over Alex Morono. But it's not a super impressive win because he made Morono look human. I'm going to go in with Santiago Ponzinibbio to win this one by decision. Yeah, I'm pretty confident with this pick. D-Rod was once a bit of a prospect, known for his boxing in the welterweight division, but he's just not really been that impressive. Whereas Santiago Ponzinibbio, he just got that really good win over Carlston Harris. There's an argument to make that he should have beaten Michelle Pereira. There's an argument to make that he should have beaten Muslim Salikov. He looked a lot more impressive in that fight with Alex Morono than D-Rod did, and D-Rod's just not really been living up. He should have lost a fight with Li Jingliang. He got submitted by Magny, knocked out by Gary, outboxed across 3 rounds by Kelvin Gastelum, and even that fight with Alex Morono. Alex Morono is one of the most washed up welterweights we've got right now on the roster. That dude is one loss away from being cut from the UFC, and he made Alex Morono look human in a way that he made Alex Morono look like he's, you know, an actual solid fighter, which is never a good look. He went life and death with Morono in a boxing match not in a boxing match, but, you know, in a boxing fight in the octagon last year, which is never a good look for D-Rod. He hasn't really been living up to the hype, and even out of shape as well. He was obese in that fight with Alex Morono. Looked like he'd gained a shit ton of pounds since that fight with Kelvin Gastelum. So I'm going to go with Ponzinibbio. He's coming off a really impressive win over Carlston Harris, where he managed to make a massive comeback KO. I don't really see him, you know, a big finishing threat than Daniel Marcus. I think when it comes to the two of them, Ponzinibbio is infinitely a better striker. So I'm going to go Ponzinibbio to win this one by decision. Then we've got big fight in the middleweight division. Reiner versus Bo Nickal. Now, Reiner went on a huge run before the UFC. Eventually goes over to one championship, goes on a massive run in one championship as well, becomes a double champion in one FC, and eventually loses to the triple champion in one FC, Malikin. Comes over to the UFC, gets his UFC debut win in a scrappy fight with Gerald Meerschaert by submitted him, and then also submits Kevin Holland at UFC 311 in his most recent fight. He's going to be taking on Bo Nickal, who is a big wrestling prospect. Came from a wrestling background, one of the best wrestlers right now in the USA. Also competed in a jiu-jitsu against Gordon Ryan. Kicks off his MMA debut by knocking out some random dude off the streets. Comes through on the Contender Series, gets a submission win in under a minute. Gets another fight in the Contender Series, gets a submission win in under a minute. Then he constantly gets main card pay-per-view fights. Debuts on UFC 285, finishes Jamie Pickett. Debuts on the main card of UFC 290, knocks out Val Woodburn. Doesn't debut on 290, but gets a fight on 290. Then fights on UFC 300, one of the biggest cards, where it was controversial why he was on the main card, but he gets a win over Cody Brundage, submits him, and then gets a fight on the main card of UFC 309, as he managed to get a really uneventful kind of lackluster win where he kind of outstrikes Paul Craig. This is one of the most 50-50 fights I've seen in a while. I've been going back and forth on my picks for this for so long. It's such a tough fight to pick because you've got Reiner, who's got awful striking, but is known for legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He has a very good grappler. He showed it in one FC's 2-0 in submissions in the UFC so far, and submitting GM3 is not an easy thing to do as well. But he has also looked human. You know, in that fight with GM3, he looked very human in that fight too. He's a very scrappy kind of striker, as he takes on Bo Nickal, who's also quite a low-level striker as well. Isn't the best striker, but he has had a couple of knockouts in his MMA career, and he's obviously a really good wrestler. So it's kind of like a wrestler versus BJJ fight. I'm going to go with Bo Nickal to win this one by decision. I am leaning towards Bo Nickal to win this one. I think if, and this is a big if, but if Bo Nickal can avoid the massive submission threat from Reiner, I think he's good in this one. I don't think he submits Reiner. If anybody's going to get a submission, it will be Reiner. But I think Bo Nickal's just going to take him down and control him with the wrestling. I think actually we're going to see Bo Nickal try and stand as well. He might have grown in confidence as he outstruck Paul Craig and was able to keep that fight standing the whole fight. But I think if any of them's going to be the better striker, it's probably going to be Bo Nickal, even though they are both low level. But I think we're going to see a heavy wrestling game plan from Bo Nickal, where he takes down Reiner, keeps it kind of a safe fight, stalls, gets the points, and he wins by decision. Yeah, I just think it's going to be Bo Nickal out wrestling Reiner in this one. Out wrestles him. gains the points, gets the decision win, and if it does keep standing, I'm probably going to lean towards Bo Nickal on the feet as well. And everyone wants to critique him for that fight with Paul Craig, but that's his 7th fight in the MMA. You know, Reiner has had 21 fights, he's had 7, and he's actually massively improved since the Contender Series, so he's been rapidly improving. Reiner is a goofy fighter, and even that fight with GM3 doesn't give me too much kind of hope when it comes to Reiner. That was a back and forth fight, and there were times in that fight with GM3 where he was getting cracked on the feet too and taken down. So as good as they both are, and as 50-50 as this fight is, I'm leaning towards Bo Nickal to win from the wrestling. So I'm going to go Bo Nickal to win this one by decision. Quite an uneventful fight, in my opinion. I don't think it's going to be one of those fights where it's like a bunch of scrambles like a Sarukian versus Gamrot, but I am leaning towards Bo Nickal getting this one done by decision. And then the main event, Cory Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueiredo. You've got Cory Sandhagen winning a big run before the UFC. Comes over to the UFC on a big winning streak, 5-fight winning streak, including a submission win over Mario Batista. Then gets choked out cold by none other than Aljamain Sterling. Picks up a 2-fight winning streak as he spinning wheel kicks Marlon Moraes and brutally knocks out Frankie Edgar. Loses a very controversial decision. He welcomes TJ Dillashaw back to the UFC. Gets an interim title fight against Peterson, where he loses that fight by decision. And so far he's 3-1 in his last 4 fights as he's coming off a loss by decision to Umar Magomedov. And I don't need to introduce you to Deiveson Figueiredo, former multiple-time flyweight champion, flyweight legend, one of the greatest flyweights of all time, known for his punching power. And since moving up to the bantamweight division, he's managed to beat Rob Font pretty comfortably, choke out Cody Garbrandt, beat Marlon Vera pretty comfortably, but he's coming off a loss to PTN at bad decision, just like Cory Sandhagen. Again, another really tough fight to call. It's a tough. I really don't know what to expect in this fight. I'm going to go with Sandhagen to win this one by decision. And I say this mainly because of the size. Deiveson Figueiredo, he's looked really good in the bantamweight division so far, but he's a former flyweight and he's very small for the division. Sandhagen's a big dude in the bantamweight division, so I think the range on the feet is already going to give Sandhagen a massive advantage, and I do think he is the better striker out of Figueiredo and him. Not that Figueiredo's a bad striker, but I just think Sandhagen's that much better. I think he's top 2, top 3 best strikers in this division, so I think it is going to be a bit of a stand-up fight where Cory Sandhagen just outpoints Deiveson Figueiredo, and obviously Figueiredo's grappling is going to be the key to victory, but Sandhagen's a good grappler, man. He showed it in that fight with Marlon Vera, he showed it in that fight with Rob Font, even Umar Magomedov. He was defending like 50% of takedowns against Umar Magomedov and getting up with ease. The only reason he lost that fight is because he had too much of a defensive mindset, which I don't think he's going to have to worry with too much against Deiveson Figueiredo, who isn't as good as a wrestler as Umar Magomedov. So I'm going to go with Cory Sandhagen by decision. Keeps the fight standing across 5 rounds. It should be a high-level competitive bantamweight fight. I don't think there's, it's going to be a complete domination from Cory Sandhagen. Obviously, Deiveson Figueiredo is going to have moments, but I think if there is a key to victory to beat Cory Sandhagen, it's going to be similar to what Nurmagomedov did, where he took him down on a consistent basis and beat him on the feet with the threat of the takedown. And I just don't see Deiveson Figueiredo doing that. He's got the striking power. He's a decent striker. Obviously, BJJ is some of the best in this division, but I don't think he poses as big as a wrestling threat as Umar Magomedov did. And on top of that, Cory Sandhagen's a very solid grappler too, so I'm picking Sandhagen to win this one, and I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision, but it should be one of the highest level bantamweight fights we've seen in a while. I matchmade this fight after Sandhagen's lost to Umar Magomedov, and hopefully it should be a good fight across 5 rounds, but I'm going to go with Sandhagen to win this one by decision. But that is my predictions for UFC Fight Night Sandhagen Figueiredo. Pretty solid fight night, 2 weeks without any Apex in a row, well actually a month without any Apex cards in a row, which is some sort of miracle for the UFC. But those are my picks. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.